Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachalamaya Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 541 of Guru Vācaka Kōvai. What Bhagavan says in this verse, I'll first give a literal English translation and then I'll explain it in more detail. The literal meaning is, people of feeble intellect, seeing the one undivided self as many, like seeing by mere mental fabrication the unbroken space as many divisions by naming, is a wonder, a product of Maya. That is an expanded form of this, an explanatory paraphrase, is people of Alpamati. Alpamati means small, petty, feeble, or mean intellect, seeing Akanda Eka Atma, the one undivided self, as many. Here, many can be taken either as referring to diverse phenomena or many separate selves. We can take it either way, or we can take it both together as many diverse phenomena, including many separate selves. Just like seeing by mere kalpana. Kalpana means a mental fabrication or imagination. The one abhinna akasa, unbroken or undivided space, as many vahe means divisions, types or kinds, by naming. What is implied when he says by naming is this is a traditional thing, but people talk about pot space, the space within a pot, or hut space, the space within a hut. And Mahakasa, the great space, that's the space outside any container. All these are just mental fabrication. Actually, the space is one and undivided. It's only from our limited perspective that we see the space inside a pot or inside a hut or as separate from the space outside. Actually, it's all one undivided space. So seeing thus is a wonder, a product of Maya. This is what Bhagavan is saying here is somewhat reminiscent of what he says in verse 13 of Uludunapadu. What he says in verse 13 of Uludunapadu is Jnanamam Tane Me. Oneself who is awareness alone is real. Nana Vam Jnanam Ajnanamam. Awareness which is many is ignorance. When he first composed this verse, he composed in a slightly different form. And the term he used for in this version, it's Nana Vam Jnanam. Originally he had written as Nana Vaikankindra Jnanam. That means the jnana that sees as many. That is, what actually exists is only ourself, who are the one infinite undivided awareness. But when we rise as ego, we see ourselves as many. We see all the numerous phenomena of this world. They're actually nothing but ourselves, but we are seeing ourselves as all these many things. That, he says, is ignorance. And then he goes on to say that even ignorance, which is unreal, does not exist except as oneself, who is awareness. That is, even this ignorance, which is the awareness that sees as many, it has no existence of its own. It is entirely dependent upon ourself, the one awareness. And then he gives an analogy for that. All the many ornaments are unreal. Do they exist except as gold, which is real? That is, gold ornaments have no separate existence of their own. They derive their seemingly separate existence from the underlying existence of their substance, namely gold. If you remove the gold, then you don't have any ornaments. So, relatively speaking, I mean, one of the principles of Vedanta is that substance is real, form is unreal. So the ultimate substance is awareness, which in the case of this analogy is analogous to gold. All the many ornaments are like the many phenomena. All those many different ornaments, they're all nothing but gold. But we see it as a ring and a bangle and a necklace and tiara or whatever. We see it as so many different ornaments, but actually the substance is one. Likewise, awareness is the one substance, but we see as all these multiple phenomena. So what is real is only ourself who are that awareness, which is one and undivided. So the parallel analogy he uses in this verse of Guru Vācaka Kōvai is space. Space is infinite, undivided, binna, as he says. It's unbroken, undivided. But because we see objects and we think of that, for example, we see a pot, and the space in the pot seems to be separate from the space outside the pot. So we call it a pot space. The space inside a house is different to the space inside a house seems to be different to the space outside the house. So we call it a hut space. And the outside space we call the great space. But actually all are one space. Like that, what actually exists is only Akhanda Ekatma, the unbroken one self. That is the one awareness. That is what actually exists. But when we rise as ego, we see this one as many. We see it as all the diverse phenomena of this world, and also as the many separate selves. Every separate person or sentient being seems to be a separate self, but actually all are only the one self. So seeing this one as many, Bhagavan says this is a wonder. It's a product of Maya. Maya is, as he makes clear elsewhere, Maya is nothing but the mind. It's the mind that makes the one seem to be many. And the mind in the sense of ego. So when we rise as ego, we see ourselves, the one, as all these many phenomena and many separate selves. Sadhu Om's, the meaning of Sadhu Om's paraphrase for this verse is, dull-witted people considering Atman, which is the divisionless one vastu, real substance, to be many jivatmans, individual selves, just like having seen it by mere mental fabrication, naming the undivided single space as spaces of many kinds, such as Gatakasha, which means the pot space, the space inside a pot, Matakasha, the hut space, the space inside a hut, and Mahakasha, the great space. That means the space outside any such container. All these divisions are they're all mental fabrication. They have no existence. So it's a wonderful effect of Maya. So this is one of the basic principles of Bhagavan's teachings. What actually exists is only one. We see it as many because we have risen as ego. That is, when we rise as ego, we mistake ourselves to be a form, namely the form of this body, and hence we see numerous other forms. But the one substance underlying all these different forms is the Ekatma-vastu, the one undivided real self, which is pure awareness, pure being awareness, Satchit. There's nothing other than that, but we see that one as if it is many. And that one is nothing but ourself, which is why Bhagavan says in verse 13 of Ulirunaptu jnanamam tane. Tan means oneself. Jnanamam means which is jnana. Jnana in the sense of pure awareness. What we actually are is pure awareness. But when we rise as ego, we see ourselves as all these numerous phenomena, and we divide them into subject and object. The subject is this person we seem to be, and the object is all the phenomena. Actually, even the person we seem to be is also an object, but we take this particular object to be ourself, and we see all the other objects as other than ourself. This is the wonderful effect of Maya. Does anyone have any questions on this?
They can put it in the chat, or they can even come on live, I guess, if they have an immediate question. It's a very simple and straightforward verse.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's very
crux.
simple and straightforward, but it's the fundamental mistake that we all make.
Yes,
We see ourselves for
the whole
one
thing.
and all this manyness.
Yeah.
All trouble results from this. And why we see ourselves as many? Because we limit ourselves by rising as ego. As soon as we limit ourselves, the remaining unlimited part of ourselves we see as many others. Someone has put something popped up in the chat. Pradeep asks, is Jivatma also ultimately unreal? We use Jivatma or Jiva interchangeably. Yes. Whether we say Jiva or Jivatma, it means the same. Jivatma is nothing but ego. That is, in regard to the question, is Jivatma ultimately unreal? Ultimately, Jivatma is real, but it's not real as Jiva, it's real as Atma. That is, Atma alone is what is real. What that means, Atma here means that Satchit, that pure being awareness that we actually are, that is what is ultimately real. So, as Jiva or ego, we are unreal as Jiva, but we are real as Satchit, as the pure being awareness. The distinction between Jiva and its reality, namely Satchit, is that Jiva is that Satchit mixed and conflated with Upadhis. Upadhis means limiting adjuncts. We mistake ourselves to be the form of this body, which, as Bhagavan says, is a form of 5 sheaths. That's the physical form of the body, the life that animates it, the prana, the mind that operates within it, that's the manas, the manamaya kosha, the intellect that operates within the mind, and the will that operates within the intellect. So these 5 make up the 5 sheaths. These are all limiting. When we identify ourselves with these, we seem to be limited. Whereas what we actually are is the infinite, unbroken Satchit. So the reality of Jiva is nothing but Atma. That is why one of the principles of Advaita is what is called Brahma Jivaikya, the oneness of Brahman and Jiva. That doesn't mean that Brahman is Jiva. It means Jiva is nothing but Brahman. That is the snake is nothing but a rope. But the rope is not a snake. The rope was never a snake. It was always only a rope. Likewise, Brahman is always only Brahman. But what seems to be Jiva or ego is nothing but Brahman. So the difference between Jiva and Brahman, the difference between ego and Swarupa, what we actually are, is not a difference in substance, it's a difference in appearance. Just like the snake and the rope are one thing. They're not 2 different things. So they're one in substance, They're different in appearance. And this appearance is in whose view? Only in the view of jiva, ego, ourself as ego. We see we see these limitations, and we therefore see all the differences. But these are not real. What is real is only the one infinite Satchit. And someone else, Sadashiv.
Are the five coverings separate bodies?
Well, Bhagavan puts it simply. He says there, all these five, that is, the term body includes all these five. In verse 5 of Ulunaptu, Bhagavan says, Udal Panchakosa Uru. The body is a form of five sheaths. Therefore, all five are included in the term body. But we can refer to them as separate bodies. I mean, sometimes they're classified as being three bodies. That is, the physical form of the body is called the stula sarira, the gross body. Then the prana, mind, and intellect are clubbed together as the subtle body. And the will, the Anandamaya kosha, is called the causal body. These are all just different classifications. These are all just labels we give these things. In Taittiriya Upanishad, where there's the first mention of these five sheaths, they don't even use the word kosha. They don't call them sheaths. They call them five atmas. The Annamaya Atma, the Atma that is made of food, the Pranamaya Atma, the Atma that is made of prana, and so on. The reason they do that is this is not what Atman actually is. This is what we take ourselves to be. So we now have what is called Dehatma Buddhi or Dehatma Bhava. We have this our experience is this body is myself. We mistake ourselves to be this body. But that is not what we actually are. What we actually are is only the fundamental being awareness.
Bhagavan ever mention the five sheaths or anything, or resulting from a question, perhaps?
Well, even in Ulujunaptu, Bhagavan mentions the five sheaths.
He does, okay.
Yeah, he said the body is a form of five sheaths. Also in Nana, he mentions the five sheaths. He says, oneself is within the five sheaths. All the sastras, all the books are outside the five sheaths. So trying to know oneself in books is futile. We need to set aside these five sheaths by looking within and know ourselves as we actually are. Also in Upadesha he mentions the five sheaths. He says that all these five, they're jada, that is devoid of awareness, and asat, devoid of existence. Therefore, they are satana nanala. They are not I who is sat. So these five sheaths, they're asat, they're unreal, and they're jada, they're devoid of awareness. Whereas I is sat, being, and chit, awareness, which are one and the same. So these five are not I. So Bhagavan often referred to this. Because this is our experience. When we're aware of ourselves as I in this body, we're never aware of ourselves as a dead body. The body we experience as I is always a living body. So there we've got the physical form of the body and the life that animates it. We also never experience ourselves as a sleeping body. Whatever body we experience as I always seems to be awake. Even in dream, the body that we take to be I seems to be a waking body. In a waking body, there's a mind, intellect, and will operating within it. And all these five, though we can distinguish one from the other, we experience them collectively as ourself. I am sitting here thinking. The I that is sitting is the body, but the I that is thinking is the mind. So, but we take the whole bundle to be I. So we experience the entire bundle to be one.
The follow-on question from that is actually from the same person has sent the email question. So we could lead into that,
Yeah.
what he says here, which is, how can we...
There was one question before that. There's a question from Martin.
Yeah, that's Martin. He's the one who's sent the email question to you.
Okay, right.
So he says, how can we see one substance when seeing might be duality?
Well, we need to understand that is, as Bhagavan said, this language is it's the language of duality. That is all languages, all whether whatever, whether it is English or French or German or Hindi or Tamil or Sanskrit or whatever it is, all languages are, we devise languages to talk about phenomena. So all words refer to something, to objects. So when we try to use language to talk about the underlying reality of these things, the language obviously is imperfect, but we have to use terms in a metaphorical sense. So when we talk about seeing ourselves, it doesn't mean one eye seeing another eye. Seeing ourselves means being aware of ourselves as we actually are. And as Bhagavan makes clear in Upadesundaya, Tanai iritale, tanai aritalam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. Because when we know anything other than ourselves, it's a mental activity. Our mind goes out to know that thing. To know ourselves, no mental activity is needed because what we actually are is awareness. And awareness is what is called Swayam Prakasha. It is self-shining. It shines by its own light. So we don't need to do anything to know ourselves. We just need to be as we are. The truth is we always know ourselves. So the knowledge we are seeking, as Bhagavan said, jnana is not a new knowledge. If it was a new knowledge that we're going to gain at some point in the future, whatever is gained will also be lost. So it's impermanent. Jnana is the permanent knowledge, that which is always shining within us as this fundamental awareness of being, I am. That is jnana. The problem is, so we always know ourselves. But the problem is we have superimposed adjuncts upon ourselves. We mistake ourselves to be something other than what we actually are. So as Bhagavan said, all we need to do is to remove the wrong knowledge and the real knowledge alone will remain. The real knowledge is the pure awareness I am. The wrong knowledge is I am this or I am that. So when Bhagavan talks about seeing ourselves, well, sometimes he said, even in English, he said sometimes, seeing is being. So the real seeing is being what we actually are.
And words are really, what is the term, lakshana or something? They're pointers.
Yeah.
They can't give us the experience, but they
Yeah.
point us towards the experience.
Yes. That is, they talk about words having Vācaka and Lakshyata. Vācaka is the meaning of the word. Lakshyata is what the word is pointing at. So all whatever words are used in this spiritual philosophy, they're all pointers. So we have to use our discernment, use our power of seeing clearly to see what the words are pointing at. So that is this is why Bhagavan said the ultimate language, the language that will ultimately reveal the truth, is not the language of words, but silence. Because silence is the very nature of being. So when Bhagavan talks about silence, he's not just talking about vocal silence or even about mental silence. He's talking about the eternal silence of pure being. So even now we are in that silence, but because we're looking outwards, we're not aware of that silence. Where do we find that silence? In the depth of our own heart. So we need to look within.
The
Again,
ultimate
we use
Lakshana.
words like looking within. Who is to look at what? It means uh, being self-attentive or being attentively self-aware. We're always self-aware. We're always aware I am, but generally we're negligently self-aware because our attention is going here and there. We're taking more interest in other things. So we need to wean our mind off the interest it has in things other than ourselves and cultivate this passionate interest, the passionate love to know what we ourselves actually are. And to know what we ourselves actually are, we need to attend to ourselves. But even attending to ourselves, again, it sounds like there's one thing attending to another thing. It's not that. It is just being as we actually are. That is being attentively self-aware. The words are always inadequate, but that's why mere sravana, mere hearing the words is insufficient. We need to do the manana. We need to think carefully about it to make sense of what these words are pointing at. But in order to do the manana, we need clarity. And we need to do manana in order to understand clearly. But we also need clarity in order to do the manana. The real clarity comes from the practice. So we do manana in order to gain sufficient clarity to understand what is the practice. Then the more we do the practice, the more clarity we get, then the more meaning we will see in Bhagavan's words. So the deeper we go in the practice, the deeper our sravana, our listening, we'll be listening to Bhagavan more carefully. Listening means we pay close attention and see what he's talking about. And the manana it's all part of one process. If we understand it correctly, though we talk of sravana, hearing, manana, thinking about it, making sense of it, and nididhyasana, putting it into practice, actually these all go hand in hand. But sravana and manana support the nididhyasana. If we haven't understood the teachings, we won't be able to put them into practice. So paying close attention to the teachings, thinking about them to make sense of them is essential. Then we can put them into practice. The more we put them into practice, the greater clarity we'll get, and then our sravana and manana will be deeper. So each supports the other, but the essential, the sravana and manana can never be they are a support to the practice, but they're never a substitute for the practice. The practice is what is essential. The practice means being self-attentive, keeping our mind fixed on ourselves, as Bhagavan put it.
We could move on to Martin's question now.
Yes.
Okay, which of course relates. His question is in two parts actually, but let me just read, see how we go. In Zen, we are taught the practice of sitting in the lotus posture, and every time we notice we become absorbed in thought, we bring our attention back to the here and now, but not to anything specific in the here and now, like the body or this sense of self. Is self-attention just another way of coming back to and remaining in the here and now? And then he follows on with, I notice the descriptions of Atma-vichara and the practice of Zazen are quite similar. Coming back to myself is also coming back to the here and now, isn't it? And coming back to the here and now includes this sense of me. You want it in two parts, or I should?
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Because I've also got it here, so I can. there's many things to be clarified here. First, about here and now. Here and now, here means the present place. Now means the present time. Time and place seem to exist only when we rise as ego. In sleep, when we do not rise as ego, we don't experience either time or place. So time and place are phenomena that appear in the view of ego. They're very fundamental phenomena because all other phenomena exist within time and space. So time and space is like the conceptual framework in which we see all phenomena. But time and space are not real. They're entirely dependent on ego. Only when we rise as ego do time and space seem to exist. So is there anything real in time and space? Ultimately, they're not real. But when we experience time and place, we always experience from a particular point in space and a particular point in time. That point from which we are experiencing time and place is called the here and the now, the present place and the present moment. What makes this particular place and this particular moment, here and now, the present place and the present moment, is the presence of ourself. That is very important to understand. Why now we experience ourselves as the 11th of July 2026. Why this particular point in time we are experiencing as now? Because it's the point where we are now present. Likewise with place. The place in which we are present is experienced by us as here. But when we talk about ourself being present in time and space, it's only when we limit ourselves as a body, but we seem to be limited to a particular time and a particular place. Actually, time and place appear within us. That is, time and place appear within the mind. But even this mind is not what we actually are, because mind appears in waking and dream, it disappears in sleep. But we endure, we exist and we shine, not only in waking and dream, also in sleep. In other words, in sleep we exist and we are aware of our existence. We are something more real than the mind in which time and space appear. So how can we use our experience of the here and now to return to ourselves for one reality? As I say, time and space are both unreal. They're both appearances. But this here and now has a special quality. Is it the time that seems to be, the place that seems to be present and the time that seems to be present? And it derives its presence from the presence of ourself as awareness. So we can use time, we can use our experience of here and now to return to ourself. To approach this from a different angle, talking about time. All events occur in time. All actions occur in time. They occur within the flow of time. Without time, nothing could happen. That is, time is the dimension in which all actions and all happenings occur. And in time, our experience of time is divided into three: past time, present time, and future time. So it's in the present moment that all things seem to happen. But what actually is this present moment? if we think about it deeply, if we try to go deep into the present moment, the present moment in which things occur must have a certain duration. So how long is the present moment? If we think about it deeply and try to observe what is the exact present moment, a moment before is past, a moment ahead is future. So the actual present moment is the place where the past meets the future. It is actually an infinitesimally fine interface between the past and the future. The present moment, when we analyze it deeply, actually has no duration. Because a moment before, moment meaning the tiniest of moment before is past. The tiniest moment ahead is future. So the present moment itself has no duration. So in the actual present moment, nothing happens. We can't do anything because it requires a duration of time for any action to be done or anything to happen. So if we go to the precise present moment, all that we find is pure being. Whose being? Our own being. So it's the being of ourself, it's our own being, the presence of ourself that makes this present moment in time seem present and the present point in space to be present. So if really being in the here and now is being in our own being. So long as we are aware of anything happening, of any actions being done, or anything happening, we are caught up in the flow of time. We are not actually in the present. The present, what we're experiencing as the present moment is a slice within this flow of time. It's a slice with some dimension, because if it had no dimension, we wouldn't be experiencing action or happenings. So to really be in the here and now, in the present place, in the present moment, we have to remain in our own being. When we remain in our own being, we go beyond time and space. Because time and space, they're just appearances. So in many spiritual practices say we should be in the here and now, but these terms are generally not understood clearly enough. People don't think deeply enough about what is the here and now. It's ultimately the here and now is nothing but the presence of ourself, our own being. So attending to our own being is alone being in the here and now in the deepest sense of the term. If we are still aware of actions or happenings, we are caught up in the flow of time. We are not actually abiding in the present. We are being swept along in the flow of time. So the present seems to be a point in time, so long as we are floating on the surface of the present, so to speak. But if we try to go deep into the present, we will find it is the eternal state of being. So it's very, very important. When Bhagavan talked about time, he talked about being in the present moment. He wasn't talking about being caught up in the flow of time. Because in the flow of time, the present is an ever-flowing moment. It's constantly moving, where the real present moment is never moving. It is eternally, It is eternal being, stillness. This is a very, very subtle point, but it's a point that needs to be understood very clearly. Martin, because you're here, is what I was trying to say, is it clear to you?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Michael. It is a very subtle thing. It's perhaps a complicated thing for the mind to grasp.
It's not actually complicated. It's extremely simple, but
Right.
it's subtle. That's what makes it difficult for the mind to grasp, because the nature of the mind is to grasp gross things. So, so many spiritual teachers. I mean, I need not name any, but there's many spiritual teachers who talk a lot about being in the present, being in the here and now. But it's very clear from what they say about the here and now that they haven't really understood what it's a very superficial understanding of the here and now that they have, because for them the now is a moment in time where the real now is beyond time. That is, we can say the here and now is like a gateway to eternity. But we have to go deep into the here and now, abide in our being, then only we experience eternity.
Yeah. So initially, my question was about practices and meditation.
Yes.
Because there does seem to be a similarity between so many different methods.
Yeah.
Where they all want us to come back to the here and now in some way, out of our mind and back to the here and now. And I wondered, is that the important thing of all practices, coming back? And is the self just something else in this moment to come back to, like the breath would be, or the body, or a chakra or something?
No. By ourself, I'm not talking about the self, but we see the person that we seem to be. Ourself in this context means our being.
Yeah.
Our being is fundamentally different to all other things. All other things are objects. Initially, we have to say, in relation to objects, we are the subject. That is, objects are things known by us, we are the knower. But actually, we're something deeper than the knower, because the knower is ego, which appears and disappears. So we know the existence of other things only when we rise as ego and limit ourselves as a form of a body. Without identifying ourselves as a form, we never experience other forms. Bhagavan had made this very, very clear in the early verses of Uluttanapadu. In verse 4, he says, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? That is, only when we limit ourselves as the form of a body, and as I said earlier, the body doesn't just mean the physical form of the body, it includes all the five sheaths, the entire bundle, the body, the life that animates it, and mind, intellect, and will that operate within it. This is collectively what Bhagavan refers to as body. This is the form that we experience ourselves to be now. And so long as we limit ourselves as this form, we experience other forms. We limit ourselves as the physical form of this body, so we're aware of physical forms. We limit ourselves as the form of the mind, and so we're aware of mental phenomena. So, but in sleep, we don't limit ourselves at all. We just remain as pure being awareness. So we're not aware of anything other than ourselves. So attending to ourselves is the key to going beyond all these appearances. Uh, so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, we are caught up in the appearances. Attending to ourselves is the doorway through which we go beyond all these appearances. In this connection, it's very helpful to understand what Bhagavan has revealed about the nature of ego. He says ego is a formless demon. It's formless because it has no form of its own. Having no form of its own means it's got no separate existence of its own, because only forms have separate existence. Something that is formless is not separate from anything because they're not. It's only when we limit ourselves as a form that we seem to have a separate existence as ego. So he says ego comes into being grasping form.
Yeah.
What he means by grasping form is, as soon as we rise as ego, we project and experience a body as I. Consider our experience in sleep. As soon as we begin dreaming, well, when we begin dreaming, while we're dreaming, we don't find any beginning point in the dream. We suddenly find ourselves in that dream. But in the dream, we always experience ourselves as a person within that dream. The entire dream world is a mental fabrication. But we don't experience as a mental fabrication because we experience ourselves as being a part of that mental fabrication. We experience ourselves as a person within the dream. So it's only when we have experienced ourselves as a person means this bundle of 5 sheaths, do we experience other things. It need not be a human person. We can experience ourselves as a dog or a cow or a cat or whatever. When we experience ourselves as a form, we become aware of other forms. So as Bhagavan said, coming back to this, what I'm explaining, what Bhagavan said about the nature of ego, this is in verse 25 of Ulunapti. He says, grasping form, it comes into being. Grasping form, it stands. There, the form he's referring to in those first 2 sentences is the form of the body that we take ourselves to be. Then he goes on to say, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Because having grasped the form of this body as ourself, in other words, having identified ourselves as this body, we are constantly attending to other things. All when he talks about form, he's using it as a generic term referring to all phenomena of all kinds, both physical phenomena and mental phenomena. So throughout the waking and dream state, we are constantly attending to forms. This is what he refers to as grasping and feeding on forms. That is, so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, we are nourishing and sustaining our seemingly separate existence as ego. So without grasping form, we cannot stand for a moment as ego. So then he says, Ruvitu Rupatram, leaving form it grasp form. Because ego cannot stand for a moment without grasping form, if it leaves one form, it grasps another form. When ego becomes too tired to continue grasping form, it subsides in sleep, it dissolves. In sleep, there's no ego. Because of tiredness, it has given up grasping and it subsides back into its being. But the problem with sleep is, though we dissolve back into our being in sleep, we rise again. So sleep is not the solution. We want a state in which this ego is permanently dissolved. How to bring about the permanent dissolution of ego, he indicates in the next sentence, in which he says, Tedinal autum pidicum. That literally means, when seeking, it takes flight. It runs away. What he means by if seeking is if we as ego seek to know our own reality, seek to know what we actually are, we as ego will take flight. In practice, what that means is, to the extent to which we attend to other things, we as ego rise and flourish. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we subside. The reason for this is, when we grasp things, in order to rise, we need to grasp form. When we try to attend to ourselves, we ourselves are formless. So we have nothing, there's nothing to support us. So when we grasp our own being, we subside back into our being. So being self-attentive, fixing our mind on our own being, on this fundamental awareness I am, is the means to bring about the subsidence of ego. Yes, the ego subsides in sleep, it subsides in coma, it subsides under general anesthesia. There are many circumstances under which ego subsides, but all those, the subsidence of ego, even by yoga, if you practice pranayama long enough, you can bring about the subsidence of ego, but it's all just temporary. That is the subsidence brought about by pranayama is called samadhi, but that's just a temporary subsidence. That is not useful because we're going to rise again. So how to bring about the subsidence in such a way that it never rises again? For this, we need to understand what ego actually is. Ego is a false awareness of ourself. That is, what we actually are is only the fundamental awareness of being, I am. But as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am, but we're not aware of ourselves as just I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am Martin, I am Michael, or I am whoever. These names are names applied to the form that we take ourselves to be. So when we attend to our being, it becomes clear to us that what we actually are, that is, our being, what we actually are, is pure awareness. Pure awareness means awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. So it's not awareness of something, but just awareness. That is what we actually are. In order to experience ourselves as such, we need to be aware of nothing other than ourselves. So we need to deliberately fix our mind or attention on our own being. We thereby subside, and eventually we dissolve back into our source. But we dissolve back into our source as a result of clearly being aware of ourselves as pure awareness. That is what destroys ego. Because as I say, ego is a false awareness of ourselves. It can be destroyed only by correct awareness of ourselves. If you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, seeing it as a snake is a mistaken perception. It's a false perception. You're seeing it as something other than what it actually is. In order to get rid of that snake, you can take a stick and try beating it, but you're not going to get rid of it. The snake is going to remain there until you look at it carefully enough. If you look at it carefully enough, you see, oh, it's just a rope. It was never a snake. Likewise, our awareness of ourselves as I am Martin, or I am Michael, or I am whoever, is a false awareness. In order to get rid of this false awareness, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, which is as the pure being awareness. In order to be aware of ourselves as such, we need to attend to ourselves. So part of your question was, is self-attention just another way of coming back to and remaining in the here and now? Attending to ourselves is the means to come back to and remain in our being, which is the presence that makes the here and now seem to be here and now, make them seem to be present. So the real presence is the presence of ourself, our own being. That is what we need to hold on to. Because if we attend to anything other than ourselves, we are caught up in this appearance of time and space. If we simply try to put an end to yoga, the aim in yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, to curb the activity of the mind, to bring the mind to a standstill. But if you bring the mind to a standstill without attending to yourself, the resulting state will be just a state of temporary dissolution. That's why Bhagavan distinguished two types of dissolution of mind, laya and nasa. Laya is a temporary dissolution, so what is in laya will rise again. Nasa is permanent dissolution, it's destruction, annihilation, so it will not rise again. So other practices like yoga or other practices can bring about a temporary dissolution of mind. They cannot bring about the permanent dissolution of mind. To bring about the permanent dissolution of mind, only knowledge, knowledge in the sense of awareness of ourself as we actually are, can bring about that permanent dissolution. Because what we are seeking to dissolve is the ignorance. The ignorance means the false awareness, I am this body, I am this person.
But that makes sense. And there's such an overlap between Buddhism and Atma-vichara, Zazen and Atma-vichara, but also some quite strong, noticeable differences. But what you say about samadhi is exactly the understanding in Zen as it being temporary.
Yeah.
Zazen's often described as, in Japan, Zanmai o Zanmai, which means Zazen is the king of samadhis, the samadhi, king of samadhis. Meaning it's the best way to experience wholeness and enlightenment, but it's not seen as permanent. So you practice it all the time and live your life with it, but there's no destruction, like you say.
Bhagavan used a term that is, samadhi is originally a term that comes from yoga. So it's not a term that is native to Vedanta. But because these cultures all are so mixed, in Vedanta they also talk about samadhi, at least in later Vedanta. But what Bhagavan made clear is the distinction between what he called sahaja samadhi and any other samadhi. Sahaja samadhi means natural samadhi. So natural samadhi is our natural state.
Yes,
What we
exactly.
always actually are. Even now we're in sahaja samadhi, but because we're looking outwards, we're not aware of it. In order to become aware of that sahaja samadhi as being our real nature, we need to look within.
Yes.
Then when we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know that we have always been as we actually are. We've never been anything else. We've never actually risen as ego. Now it seems to us we've risen as ego and we're aware of all these things. But if we investigate ourselves deeply enough, we will know what we actually are is just pure being, for which there's never any rising. That's why the ultimate truth is what is called ajata. Nothing has ever come into being. There's never been any rising as ego. Therefore, there's never been any appearance of world or anything else. All that exists is just pure being, and it always remains as it is. So what we actually are is not even in the least affected by our rising as ego. So all we need to do is to bring about the dissolution of ego, and we remain as we always actually are. That is why Bhagavan said, when we attain liberation, that liberation is not a new attainment, it is eternal. Attaining liberation means recognizing what we eternally are.
Yeah.
So then there's no bondage. Since there's no bondage, even to talk of liberation is meaningless. So what we are seeking is the state that is beyond bondage and liberation,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is our natural state, what we always actually are.
Yeah. But in Buddhism, they talk about this moment being an unbroken whole, where there's
Yeah,
no separate self with a
yeah,
small s, separate to time and place. It's just something. They call it something.
yeah,
They has some sort of reality, but they don't describe it in the way you have,
yeah, yeah. Well,
where
according,
self is reality, brings
yeah,
the
yeah,
reality.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the word self is a lot of argument goes on about words without really understanding. We can drop the word self altogether. We don't, the term Atman is not an essential word. The term self is not an essential word. What we need to recognize is the one thing of which we are absolutely certain is our own being.
Yeah.
We cannot be certain of the existence of anything else. Everything we experience could be an appearance.
Mm.
But our existence as awareness, that we can never doubt. Because
Mm.
we couldn't experience an illusion if we didn't exist. So whether other things are real or illusory, we ourselves, our own being, is the one certainty. The only thing we can ever be absolutely certain of is our own being. Our
But
being and our awareness are one and the same. So
yeah.
um, it's since that's the only thing we are certain of, that is what we need to investigate. That is what we need to hold on to. When we hold on to that, everything else will dissolve, and that alone will remain.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about the ego, and when the ego arises, time and space or place
Mm.
arises.
Yeah.
That's exactly the understanding of Zen,
Mm.
that they are an unbroken whole. So ego and place and space must be exactly the same.
Yeah.
Um,
In some forms of Buddhism, they talk about dependent origination.
yes, that's it.
In,
Yeah.
in effect, that is what Bhagavan is talking about, because he says the all other things appear only when we rise as ego. And ego is ego is the cause for the appearance of other things, but it's also dependent upon the appearance of other things.
Yes.
Because ego is the subject. There's no subject in the absence of objects. So subject and object rise and stand together and subside together. In one verse in Uludunapli, verse 7, he says, though uh, he uses two words, Uluhu, which is world, and Arivu, which is awareness. But the awareness he's talking about is not the real awareness, it's the awareness of the world. That is ego. So he says, though the world and awareness appear and disappear simultaneously, it is only by the awareness that the world shines. That is, they're inseparable. The rising of ego and the appearance of world are inseparable. But the basis is ego, because it's only in the view of ego that the world seems to exist. So ego as ego is that is the defining nature, the defining characteristics of ego are, as ego we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body,
Yeah.
and we are consequently aware of other things. So the appearance of the body and world is entirely dependent upon ego, because they have no existence independent of ego. But ego is also dependent on them, because it's only when it projects these things that it seems to have a separate existence. So
Yeah.
this I think the underlying idea in the Buddhist idea of dependent origination. But
Yes.
though they're mutually dependent, the cause is the rising of ego.
Yeah.
Without the rising of ego, there cannot be the appearance of world, because the world, body and world appear only in the view of ego. So,
Well,
so since ego is the basis for the appearance of other things, if we want to go beyond all this appearance, we need to investigate the reality of ego. When we investigate the reality of ego, ego dissolves back into the being from which it arose. And when ego dissolves, everything else dissolves with it. And what then remains is that one that one being awareness, but has always remained as it always is, has never been affected by any of these things.
yeah. Well, Nagarjuna says that even this moment is not a self-existing thing. It's not separate from past and future. It's
Yes,
also independent.
yes,
Everything is
but
dependent.
what
Everything else.
distinguishes the present moment from the past and future is this present moment is the moment in which we are present.
Yeah, that's
So
what they don't say.
we are what lends the semblance of presence to the present moment. But so in order to understand the reality of time, that is, all time depends upon the present moment. Past and future, it's only in relation to the present moment that sometimes the past and sometimes the future. And it's only in the present moment that we have memories of the past and anticipations of the future. So
Yeah,
the present is the crucial moment. But what is the underlying reality of the present moment is the presence of ourself. In other words, our own being. That is what we need to hold on to. Then the appearance of time and space will disappear.
yeah. Nagarjuna, I think, uses the phrase gamyamanam, which I think means that there's no self visiting this moment. They're both the same. But I think from what you're saying, he's talking about the ego.
Ego, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
which is very interesting. But also,
And
the Zazen is not an act of looking. It's a sort of non-dual practice, which is what made me perk up when I heard the description about the Vichara, self-enquiry, because that's also not a looking at an object.
it's not looking at an object, but it is metaphorically a looking. But what we're looking at is not the object, but the subject.
Yeah,
But it's a very subtle looking, because it's not a looking as a subject looking at an object. We look at ourselves by being ourselves,
yeah.
because
Well,
what we essentially are, our being is awareness, and awareness is always aware of itself. So it's by being as we actually are that we become aware of ourselves as we actually are. But how to be as we actually are? We need to cease rising as ego. And in order to put an end to the rising of ego, the key is to fix our attention on ourselves.
yeah. I think the takeaway for me is quite simple. It feels like, because in Zen they say there's no Buddha outside of practice, which to me means that it's the samadhi, as you say, is temporary.
Yeah.
If I want something permanent, then perhaps Zazen is not the practice to continue pursuing.
Yeah.
So that's
What is the one thing that is permanent? The one thing that is permanent is our own being. Because we have never experienced any moment in which we were absent. So our presence is there could be no experience in our absence, So our absence has to be the one permanent underlying reality. That is why, that is what we need to hold on to.
Yeah.
We ourselves are already permanent. We're already eternal. But because we're attending to these ephemeral things, we are caught up in the appearance um, of um, of temporality. So
Yeah.
we need to go beyond this appearance by holding on to that which is being, which underlies the appearance of time.
Yeah.
That
I
is, there
understand.
cannot be anything more fundamental than being.
Hmm.
Because
But Buddhism
anything
doesn't
other than
talk.
being is not. So
Yeah.
the most fundamental thing is being.
Hmm.
And it's our own being which we need to hold on to. Because the existence of other things is an appearance. The one being that is always shining is our own being.
Yeah. Buddhism doesn't really talk about being. It talks about, I think it points to what is there as in the same way that Bhagavan seems to. The
Yeah,
ego, the dualities, the seeing objects. Um, but its method is what the Buddha described as bhavana, which we translate as letting happen or happenings, which
yeah,
is a sort of practice of non-doing, which allows everything to continue and burn itself out, or come to a stop, if that makes sense.
yeah,
The Buddha used the word nirvana. He didn't really talk about enlightenment. He talked about a fire going out because the
yeah,
fuel
extinguishing. Yeah,
extinguishing because the fuel it runs out of fuel.
yeah.
So it's a kind of not adding any fuel to the fire and letting it burn out on its own. But I don't know. I mean, Buddhism is so old now. It's very difficult to understand
Yeah, and
what the practice is.
it's also what Buddha actually taught is also very difficult to be sure what he actually taught because he didn't write anything. Nothing
No.
was written for a few hundred years after. So
Yeah.
it's other people's understanding of what he taught, which may not be actually what he taught. So it's
Yeah.
whereas
Yeah.
we are fortunate with Bhagavan, he himself has written it. If we think about Bhagavan's teachings are so logical
Mm.
and
Mm.
it's based upon our own experience. Bhagavan doesn't ask us to believe anything, but we do not know already.
Mm.
For
Mm.
example, some of his teachings are extremely radical. If ego comes into being, everything comes into being. If ego is not, everything is not.
Yeah.
For
Yes.
most of us, that seems really radical. But if we think about it, that's actually our experience.
Mm.
When we don't rise as ego in sleep, there is nothing.
Yeah.
When we rise again as ego in waking and dream, we make an assumption, oh, this world that was there before I went to sleep is back again now, therefore it has continued.
Yeah.
And we ask others, did the world exist when I was asleep? Yes, of course it did. So we satisfy ourselves this world is exists independent of our perception of it. But actually, we've got no evidence that anything exists independent of our perception of it. When we call upon the, Bhagavan said, when you call upon the testimony of others to, to verify that the world existed in, when you were asleep, that is like calling upon the testimony of a thief to testify his own innocence. Because
Yeah.
the others who will testify that the world existed are themselves a part of the world whose existence is in question. So
Mm.
actually, if we look at our experience, we have no evidence that the body and world existed in sleep at all.
No.
Now,
in
when we
Zazen,
awake, it just seems that so. Yes, I lay down on the bed and I woke up on the same bed, and therefore I wasn't aware of the body, but it was still there. The bed was still there. The world was still there. These are all just assumptions. It's not our experience. So Bhagavan, his teachings are extremely radical, but we can see the truth of it from our own experience.
mm,
Now the world appears, but we've no evidence that the world actually exists. All we can say is it seems to exist. In whose view does it seem to exist? In my view. That's all we can say. So we can't, there's no evidence that this world is anything more than just an appearance. And
in
there
Zazen,
can't be an appearance without appearing to something. So to whom does it appear? To me.
yeah. In Zazen, the Japanese masters say Shinjin Datsuraku, which means body and mind drop off. So the self and the world drop off, but
Yeah.
it's nothing's destroyed. There's no destruction. It's picked back up again at
Well,
the end of practice. For
yes.
us.
Well, according to Bhagavan, yes, it all drops off.
Yeah.
There's no destruction because there was never anything. This is the Advaitic principle of Ajata. There's a in a couple of the Upanishads, there's a verse which is quoted by Gaudapada in the Mandukya Karika, and people generally assume it's Gaudapada's verse, but actually it existed before Gaudapada. That verse means na nirodha, there's no destruction. Na cha uppati, there's also no arising. If nothing has ever arisen, nothing can ever be destroyed. So the ultimate truth is beyond appearance and destruction. There's only being, it's the ultimate truth.
But isn't there a sort of destruction of the ego in some way, or a correct understanding of it, and a moment of ending?
If you look carefully at the snake and see it's a rope, have you destroyed the snake? Have you killed the snake? You're free of the snake, but you've not actually killed it because it was never there in the first place. Likewise with ego. We talk about the annihilation of ego or mind, but that's not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is there never was any mind or ego to be destroyed.
So what's that moment of change then that Zazen and Samadhi doesn't seem to bring about, that self-inquiry does seem to bring about? Where does the permanence come in that Zen doesn't have?
It's recognizing that what is permanent is always permanent. The one permanent thing is our own being. Our being, when I say being and awareness are one and the same. Our being is awareness. So that is what is permanent. When we recognize that we have always been nothing but being, from this side, we describe it as destruction of the mind, manonasa. But from that side, there never was any mind to destroy. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 17 of Upadeshundya, when one investigates the form of the mind without forgetting, there's no such thing as mind at all. He doesn't say the mind is destroyed. He says, manomenum ondrile. There's no such thing as mind at all. Neva manasam. No thing at all.
Yeah.
But there's no use in our saying, oh, there's no mind. I mean, nowadays there's these things are trivialized by the neo-Advaitins. They say, oh, there's no ego. You don't have to worry about anything. Yes, there's no ego, but there seems to be ego. So long as we mistake the rope to be a snake, we're afraid, and we're not going to walk any further down the path because we're afraid that snake's going to bite us. Only when we see it's a rope do we happily go beyond. So we need to see what actually is. That is ourself. In other words, we need to see, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, and all problems come to an end, with the recognition that there never were any problems in the first place.
Michael, do we want to move on?
Yes, I think so. I think so. Sorry.
We've
Yeah.
still got questions by
Yeah,
email.
yeah.
Plus a few others as well.
Yeah. Well, I hope this was useful for everyone.
Covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
So then, Michael, we've got this next email question.
Yes.
When I ask, who am I found nothingness, silence. Immediately focus goes on sensation or breath. Is concentration should be practiced for one-pointedness? Question mark. And how do I actually experience Ajat Avada, the highest truth, where one realizes nothing exists, not even the body, mind or world, which I assume to be so solid and real?
Right. Okay. Start with the first. When I ask, who am I found nothingness, silence. Who is the I who found nothingness? The very fact that there's the experience, I experience nothingness, I experience silence. Obviously, there is something there. There's the I that is aware of that nothingness. That is what we should hold on to. If we try to investigate ourselves and feel, oh, there's nothing, and then allow our attention to go on to the sensation or breath, we have missed the point. Okay, let me go back, take one step back. Firstly, the question, when I ask, who am I? Asking who am I is not the practice. Of course, we need to have an understanding that is, the question, who am I, is relevant at first because we need to first have distinguish ourselves conceptually from what we take ourselves to be. So it begins with a conceptual analysis, but we're not this body or mind or any of these things. Finally, we come to the understanding that what we are is not any of these phenomena. We are just the awareness in whose view all the phenomena appear. Once we come to that understanding, we need to investigate that awareness that we actually are. In other words, we need to fix our mind or attention on ourselves. If we've understood the teachings correctly, we will understand, but we are not nothingness. We are that light of awareness, but illumine the appearance of things and the disappearance of things. We're aware, for example, now we're aware of the appearance of this body and world and all these things. We're also aware that in sleep these things didn't appear. So we're aware of both the appearance and the disappearance. So we are that awareness in which all things appear and disappear. If we come to the conclusion that it's nothingness, it's because of the reality that we give to the appearance. Whether other things appear or disappear, the awareness is always, we always exist there as awareness. So we are not nothingness. In verse 12 of Ulunaptu, Bhagavan says, the awareness that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is the real awareness. When he says devoid of knowledge and ignorance, he means knowledge and ignorance about other things. So long as we rise as ego, there's the appearance of other things. And we know some things, and we also know that there are other things we don't know. there's so many things we're aware but we don't know. Knowledge and ignorance has a meaning only so long as other things seem to exist. But in sleep, can we say we know anything? No. Can we say we know nothing? No, we can't, because there's nothing for us either to know or to not know. All that exists in sleep is the awareness of our own being, I am. So we need to recognize that awareness that shines whether other things appear or disappear, that is what we actually are. Then we will not be, we will not mistake that to be nothingness, because nothingness doesn't actually exist. If nothing exists, then it's not nothing, it's something. So, but so logically, there's no such thing as nothingness. But to talk of either something or nothing, there has to be an I that is aware of the seeming appearance of something or the seeming appearance of nothing. It's all only in the view of this I. So what we need to, our focus shouldn't be on the sensation or the breath, but should be only on the I, but we only on ourself, on ourself as this being or awareness, I am. That is what we are to attend to. Then the next question is, concentration should be practiced for one-pointedness. I assume this means that should we concentrate on something other than ourselves in order to gain one-pointedness? It is not really necessary, because yes, one-pointedness is necessary, but if we to gain one, ultimately what we need to gain one-pointedness on is on ourselves. We need to keep our attention one-pointedly focused on ourselves. So rather than practicing concentration on other things, we should practice concentration, trying to concentrate our attention on ourselves. So no other concentration practice is necessary. Concentration means focus. We're focusing, trying to focus our mind on our own being. That is the most beneficial practice, because that is the practice that will lead us to our goal. And then the next question, and how do I actually experience Ajata-vada? Okay. Ajata doesn't seem to be true now, because we have risen as ego. In the view of ego, that is, the experience of ego is the very antithesis of Ajata. Because Ajata says nothing has ever come into being or ever ceased to be. What is alone is as it always is. In other words, we alone are as we always are, nothing, and nothing else exists. But that's not our experience now, because we've risen as ego. So in order to experience Ajata, we need to get rid of ego. How do we get rid of ego? Ego is a false awareness of ourself. It's a mistaken awareness of ourself as I am this person. So in order to get rid of ego, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. That alone will destroy ego, which is a false awareness of ourselves. That is in order to remove the wrong awareness of ourselves, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. Just like in order to remove the illusion of a snake, we need to see the rope clearly. So we look at the snake very carefully, and we say, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, we need to look at ourselves very carefully. But in the analogy, the snake and the rope are both objects. So if we look at what seems to be a snake, we see it's a rope. But their objects are entailed. In the case of self-investigation, we are not investigating an object, we're investigating the subject. The I in whose view all objects appear. So, in other words, we need to keep our attention fixed on ourselves, this fundamental awareness of being, I am. That is what we need to fix our attention on. If we keep our attention fixed on that, ego will subside and eventually dissolve forever back into that being. That is the experience of ajata. So ajata is the recognition that no such thing as ego has ever existed. Since no such thing as ego has ever existed, nothing else has ever existed. Because as Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Ulunaptu, if ego comes into being, everything comes into being. If ego is not, everything is not. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. Because if we investigate this ego, ego will subside and dissolve back into its source. Everything else will subside along with it. And then it will be clear but no such thing as ego or world or anything else has ever actually appeared at all. What is alone is as it is. And that what is only ourself as awareness, a pure awareness, pure being awareness. So I don't know, the person who asked this question, are you here now?
I think so. I got a message saying the question from Tamina, it was.
Yes.
Sona.
Okay.
Maybe not. She says, Sona says, thank you for answering my question from Tamina.
Oh, okay, good. So
So
I hope the answer was sufficiently clear.
Yeah, okay, good. So then this is the last email question from Sanjay. What is more fundamental, the gunas or the vasanas? What is the relationship between gunas and vasanas?
Okay, to answer this, we need to consider Bhagavan's teachings. What is the most fundamental thing of all is Satchit, our own being and awareness. That is what is most fundamental. From that, something called ego has arisen, an I that is aware of itself as I am this body. So only when this ego rises, all other things rise. So the ultimate ground, the ultimate base of everything is the pure being awareness. When ego rises, all other things rise. So ego is the ground for the appearance of all other things. The nature of ego is to attend to things other than itself. So this ego has what are called Vishaya vasanas. Vishaya means objects or phenomena. Vasanas means inclinations. So ego has a strong inclination to attend to things other than itself. The reason it has such strong inclination is that as ego, our existence as ego depends upon our being constantly aware of other things. So because we cannot survive as ego for a moment without constantly attending to things other than ourselves, we have strong inclinations to attend to other things. Those inclinations are what are called Vishaya vasanas. So Bhagavan has made it clear the vasanas are the seeds that give rise to all Vishayas, to all phenomena. So the most fundamental is our being. Second most fundamental is ego. Third most fundamental is vasanas. So apart from ego and our being, there's nothing more fundamental than vasanas. So where do gunas come into the picture? Gunas are qualities. So starting from vasanas, qualities are manifest. That is, there are different qualities of vasanas. So the gunas are generally classified as three: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva literally means beingness. So it's the quality of purity and clarity. Rajas means the activity, the restless activity. And tamas means the darkness. So these are qualities we can see throughout the world. Throughout phenomena, we can see these three gunas are there. So these gunas begin from a level of vasanas. Vasanas have qualities. They can be predominantly sattvic vasanas, predominantly rajasic vasanas, predominantly tamasic vasanas, or they can be, most vasanas are a mixture of in greater or lesser proportions of these three. The vasanas are the seeds that give rise to everything else. So the whole of all manifest existence, that is all phenomena, all have these qualities. Because the seeds, the vasanas that sprout as all these things have these qualities. So if we put it in terms of the Sankhya philosophy, that is, the idea of the gunas originates, I think, from Sankhya philosophy, but it's a very useful idea, so it's been adopted by Vedanta also. But in Sankhya philosophy, gunas are the nature of prakriti. Prakriti means the phenomena. Anything that appears is prakriti. So Sankhya is a dualism. It's a subject-object dualism. So the subject, the awareness, is Purusha. Whatever it's aware of is Prakriti. And Prakriti is defined, that all of Prakriti, throughout Prakriti, from the subtlest of grossest, we can find these gunas, these Raja, Sattva, and Tamas. So the seeds that give rise to the appearance of Prakriti are the vasanas. So the gunas are qualities of the vasanas, and hence qualities of everything that sprouts from the vasanas. That is the relationship between them. But if you ask which is more fundamental, the vasanas have to be more fundamental, because you can't have a quality without something that possesses that quality. So what possesses the qualities are the vasanas, and everything that sprouts from the vasanas. In other words, the whole of Prakriti, all phenomena, all we can see these gunas throughout the manifestation, from the subtlest to the grossest. The subtlest is the vasanas, the grossest is all the objects of the world. Is that a clear answer?
Yes, sir.
Mm.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
Okay, so now we're into the questions on the chat. There's a major difference between living and non-living things, which is the being or prana itself. How do we understand non-living things' existence?
Non-living, well, this difference between the okay, we need to consider when we talk about living things, not that is, life and awareness are not necessarily the same thing. There are some things that have life, like plants have life. Do they have awareness? That's a philosophical question which we need not concern ourselves with. But generally we think of animal life as sentient and plant life as insentient. Whether we are right or wrong in that need not concern us, but so if we're talking about the difference between, are we talking about the difference between sentient things or insentient things? Yeah, are we talking, sorry, are we talking about difference between sentient things and insentient things, or living things and non-living things? Rocks are non-living. Grass is living. But is the grass aware? We don't know. Is the rock aware? We assume it's not. But uh, if we think about this more deeply in terms of Bhagavan's teachings, actually no object is aware. Now, because we identify this body as I, this body seems to be aware. But the body actually, as Bhagavan said, the body is jada. It has no awareness of its own. The body seems to be aware because we identify that body as I. And because this body seems to be aware, all the other bodies seem to be aware. So there's the appearance of many sentient creatures. That's how it seems to be. So long as we identify ourselves with a body and experience ourselves as I am this body, there seem to be so many other bodies who are equally sentient. But we actually experience only one awareness. So awareness alone is self-existent. That is, awareness alone knows its own existence. Anything that is not aware does not know its own existence. So it seems to exist only in the view of something that is aware. So from Bhagavan's teachings, we come to understand that the real awareness is only pure awareness. In the view of pure awareness, there is nothing other than itself, because pure awareness alone is what actually exists. It's only in the view of ego that there seems to be other things. And ego is that awareness that has identified itself as I am this body. So ego is sometimes referred to as chit jada granti. Chit means awareness, jada means non-aware, and granti means not. So ego is the not formed by the seeming entanglement of chit and jada. Actually, chit, the pure awareness, is never entangled with anything. But as ego, we experience ourselves as I am this body. Ego is a form of consciousness, and it's identifying itself with something that is not conscious, namely this body. So it's called the not, the not formed by the entanglement of what is aware and what is not aware. So all phenomena exist only in the view of ego. Ego is not a phenomenon. Ego is all objects, whether physical objects or mental objects, all are phenomena. They're things known by us. Whereas ego is the subject, that which knows all these things. So if we make the distinction between chit and jada, jada things seem to exist only in the view of ego. That is, anything that is does not have awareness of its own exists only in the view of ego. So this body, for example, this body doesn't actually have any awareness. So it exists only in the view of ego. The same with the mind. Mind in the sense of, when we talk of mind, we need to be a little careful because we use the term mind to refer to the subject and also to all the other thoughts. So the element of the mind that is the subject is ego. All the other thoughts are objects. So other thoughts do not know, the only thought that knows itself is ego. All other thoughts are known only by ego. So the only thought that has awareness, or that is endowed with awareness, we can say, is this first thought, I, namely ego. So all phenomena exist only in the view of ego. So so ego is shining by the light of awareness all other things are shining by ego's light of awareness. So does this light of awareness belong to ego? It seems to, but it doesn't. Why? Because ego appears and disappears. But the awareness remains in the absence of ego. In sleep, we don't cease to be aware. We cease to be aware of phenomena, but we remain as just awareness. So we remain as awareness that is not aware of anything, just for being awareness. That is the awareness that ego borrows to know other things. So the ultimate reality is only that being awareness. Ego is a thief. It has usurped this awareness on one hand, and it's usurped a body on the other hand, mixes them together and says, I am this. If we separate the awareness from this body, in other words, we hold on to the awareness and let the body drop off, then ego itself will cease to exist, because ego seems to exist only as a result of this conflation. In other words, ego is the not. When you separate the chit from the jada, the not ceases to exist, and the chit alone remains. When the not ceases to exist, the jada also ceases to exist, and the chit alone remains. In other words, we remain as awareness. Chris, can you ask the question again? Because I can't remember the exact wording. I can't remember, so I'm not sure whether I've answered the question fully or...
Yeah, let me just go to it. This is non-living beings we're talking about. How do we understand non-living beings? How do we understand non-living things' existence?
Non-living things seem to exist in the view of ego. But even living things seem to exist in the view of ego, because it's only in the view of ego that phenomena of any kind seem to exist. Even all the many other, so long as we identify ourselves with as this body, we mistake this body to be sentient. So when we see many other bodies just like this body, human bodies and dogs and cows and elephants and giraffes and monkeys and all sorts of different bodies, they all seem to be sentient like us. But as I say, this body is not sentient, it's the ego that is sentient. So the ego that sees this body, that identifies itself as this body, and therefore mistakes this body to be sentient, also mistakes all the other bodies to be sentient. But all these things exist only in the view of ego. And ego, we seem to be ego only so long as we identify ourselves as a body. If we investigate ourselves, this ego dissolves and the pure being that we actually are alone remains. So everything, all phenomena are dependent for their seeming existence upon the existence of ego. And ego is dependent for its seeming existence on the real existence of ourself, our own being.
So, should we have the next one?
Yes, please.
Okay, so he says a couple of things. First of all, thank you. Is the function of the jiva or ego just to experience the objects and phenomena and to appropriate what is done and what is experienced to itself? And then he says, referring to what you mentioned just now, when we experience anything other than ourselves, we are caught in time. I mean, this is referring to your talk earlier on. This is sort of time lapse there.
So was there a question to that, or was that just a comment? The last bit about
comments. I mean, they're put as, it's a question. Is the function of the jiva or ego just to experience objects and phenomena and to appropriate what is done and what is experience to itself. So that is a question as such. Whether it's a rhetorical question,
Okay.
not
Okay.
sure. Or we can move on. I mean, we have quite a good string
Okay.
of questions.
I'll answer this. That is,
Okay.
we can say the nature of ego is to identify itself as a body, therefore to appropriate these things as appropriate the body and mind as I, and other things as mine. That is, the ego has that nature of appropriating. If we say function, it sounds like it has a purpose. Ego has no purpose. If at all we want to have a purpose, our sole purpose should be to know what we actually are, and thereby to bring an end to this ego, because ego is just an appearance, it's not real. But though ego is an appearance, it is the appearance in whose view all other appearances appear. So ego is the fundamental appearance. And we seem to be ego only so long as we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. So to put an end to our appearance as ego, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And the second part was something? It sounded more like a comment. I can't remember what it was.
I think it was more like a comment, probably.
Okay.
So we can move on to the next one, which is actually he's put two questions here. I remember reading Ramana would use gunpowder and wet coal as an analogy to describe the maturity of a seeker, but please elaborate on exactly how did Ramana go about determining someone's ripeness. For instance, could he discern this even with just a mere look into somebody's eyes? So then the next comment is a different topic. So.
Okay. Yeah. From our point of view, yes, we have to say Bhagavan could obviously he recognized who are the mature souls, who are not the mature souls. That's from our point of view. From Bhagavan's point of view, there are no differences at all, because Bhagavan has samadrishti. He doesn't see differences. He sees only himself. But because we see him as a person, and so it seems to us that he sees differences. So yes, from a certain the truth is, what is Bhagavan? Bhagavan is that pure awareness that is ever shining in our heart as our own being. That is what he actually is. As such, he is not aware of anything other than himself. But since he is the reality of all things, from our perspective, it seems that he knows everything, because he knows the reality of everything. So it seems to us that he knows everything. So in that sense, yes, we can say, yes, he knew, he knows how mature we are. And depending on how mature we are, if we are very mature, when we hear his teachings, we'll at once put it into practice, and like gunpowder will get consumed immediately. Whereas most of us are more like the stems of banana plants. The stems of banana plants have a lot of water in. So if you put on a fire, they take time to dry out and burn. So that's the condition for most of us. So there are different degrees according to how far we've already advanced along the spiritual path. We will be relatively more dry, more combustible. But we need not concern ourselves with this, because whether we are very mature or we're immature, the path is the same. We need to know ourselves, so we need to investigate ourselves. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we'll know all these differences are unreal. But of course, from the perspective of an aspirant on the path, the degree of maturity does make a difference, because if we are really mature, our mind will not be interested in anything other than trying to know who am I. Whereas most of us, our mind is still soaked with vasanas, so we're still interested in so many other things. And so there's a lot of work for us to do to wean our mind off its interest in other things. How we wean our mind off is by patiently and persistently trying to be self-attentive. So the more we attend to ourselves, the more the Vishaya vasanas lose their strength. They become weaker and weaker. And the Sattvasana, the love to attend to our own being, becomes stronger. This is the drying out of the wood, but we want to consume in the fire. Obviously, very dry wood will catch fire much quicker than very wet wood. But the process is the same from beginning to end. We are trying to attend to ourselves in order to weaken the Vishaya vasanas and strengthen the Sattvasana. When the Sattvasana becomes stronger than all the Vishaya vasanas, then we become like gunpowder and we spontaneously ignite. Spontaneously means instantaneously we ignite, because we have the clarity and the love to attend to ourselves so keenly that we cease to be aware of anything else and thus become aware of ourselves as the pure awareness that we actually are, thereby destroying ego.
So patient practice, basically.
Yes.
So he has another question added. He says, did Bhagavan ever speak about the role of tears or the value of humbly acknowledging one's helplessness on the path to self-realization? Are there any accounts of Bhagavan being brought to tears?
Absolutely. I mean, Bhagavan has sung about it in Akshramlai. He talks about the body melting in a river of tears. So yes, when there's intense love there in the heart, we will be melted, and our heart will be melted, and that melting of the heart manifests in the form of tears. So that intense love is absolutely necessary. Bhagavan doesn't explicitly refer to tears, but he does refer to the melting of heart when he was asked, who is Arunachala Ramana? He said, Arunachala Ramana is the Paramatma, but delights as awareness in the cave of the heart lotus of all living beings, beginning with Hari. Then he goes on to say that Bhagavan doesn't just ask us to believe such things, he shows us how we can experience it for ourselves. So in the second half of that verse, he begins, Parival Ulam Uruha. Parival means by love. Ulam is heart. Uruha means melting. So heart melting with love, when one enters the cave where that sublime supreme dwells, the eye of awareness opening, you will know this truth. It will reveal itself to you. So the key to success in vichara is the heart needs to melt with love. So long as we're hard-hearted, that is, so long as our mind is solid with dense vasanas, we will not have the love to turn within. But the more the vasanas get attenuated by the practice of self-investigation, the more that love will grow in intensity, and it will melt our heart. And it's with that heart melting with love when we turn within that we will finally dissolve forever back into our own being. So that melting of the heart is absolutely essential. And the melting of the heart manifests outwardly in the form of tears.
Yeah, it catches you now and again.
Yes, yes, yes. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, people shed buckets of tears for wife, husband, children, and possessions, and all these things. If they would shed even an ounce of those tears for God, that would change everything. So we need to if we want to escape from this samsara, being caught up in all these things we're caught up in, we need to our heart needs to melt, and our body, Bhagavan described the body melting in the river of tears. We need to melt so much with love to know what we actually are.
Should we move on to the next
Yes.
question? Okay. The verse refers to people with feeble intellect. I don't know which verse it means, but the
No, that's the verse of Guru Vācaka Kōvai.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
So this is relating to that, yeah.
yeah.
But the intellect is just a tool used in relative existence. Can someone with strong intellect, or pure intellect, ever comprehend pure awareness? At best, it can only be aham idam, I am all this, or idam aham, all of this is I. But to be as only aham, or pure awareness, no intellect is needed, only grace, question mark.
That is very different forms of intellect. If our mind is always going outwards, we may have a brilliant intellect for understanding worldly things. That is, some people have such an intellect they're able to understand very advanced mathematics or advanced physics or all these things. This is a certain type of intellect, but it's not the type of intellect that we need for the spiritual path. The intellect required for the spiritual path is a very subtle intellect. The intellect that can distinguish the permanent from the impermanent, the seer from the seen. This is called Viveka. Viveka is a form of intellect, but it's a very subtle form of intellect. It's a type of intellect to be able to distinguish subtle differences. That intellect is absolutely essential because when we're investigating ourselves, we are trying to attend to ourselves alone. Now we are experiencing ourselves mixed and conflated with adjuncts. So if we don't have that ability to distinguish ourselves from the adjuncts with which we're conflated, we're not going to be able to investigate ourselves. So we need to have a sufficiently subtle intellect to recognize that awareness and being is something separate from these adjuncts that we now take ourselves to be. And with that subtle intellect, we need to hold on to the awareness alone, the being alone, and leave everything else. So Bhagavan often talk, the term he used in this verse is alpamati. That means alpa means very small, very trivial. How did I translate it? Sadhu Om translated it as in his Tamil Pariparai, he put mandamati. Manda means dull. The term in the verse is alpamati. Alpa means small, petty, feeble, mean. That is the worldly intellect. So someone may have a brilliant intellect for understanding advanced mathematics or physics or any of these very complicated things, but from a spiritual perspective, their intellect is still alpamati. Someone can be not so brilliant in understanding all these complicated things, but is able to distinguish for subtle things. So it's a subtle intellect we need. In this word mati, it's a word that the exact mati, the exact meaning of mati depends to some extent on the context in which it's used. For example, in verse 19 of Uludunapadu, Bhagavan talks about vidimati, fate and will. There, mati means will. In other contexts, mati means mind. But in other contexts, it means intellect. So Bhagavan in this word mati used actually in many verses in Uludunapadu. In verse 19, he uses it in the sense of will. In verse 22 of Uludunapadu, when he talks about except by turning the mind back within and merging it in God, who shines within the mind, giving light to the mind, how to know God by the mind. There, mati means mind. But then in verse 23 and verse 28, he uses mati more in the sense of intellect. In 23, he talks about nunmati. Nunmati means a subtle mind or subtle intellect. And in verse 28, he uses the term kondamati. Konda means a very sharp, acute, penetrating intellect. That is that ability to distinguish ourselves from all other things. So that's the subtlest form of intellect. So intellect in this sense is a very subtle power of discernment, of viveka, of distinguishing one thing from another thing. Not one gross thing from another gross thing, but the subtlest of all subtle things from all other things. So that's the sense in which Bhagavan uses the term mati when he uses the term mati in the sense of intellect. Is that ability to see the very subtle things. So that's quite different to the mati that is required to understand very complex things, like advanced mathematics or physics or any complex subject. This is not a complex subject. This is an extremely subtle subject, extremely simple subject, but very subtle. That's why Bhagavan talks about nunmati, the subtle intellect. Is that a clear answer to that question?
Yes, thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, is it not a misnomer to say myself or ourself? Because my and our implies differentiation as well. Wouldn't it be more accurate to just say self? For e.g., attending to self, not attending to ourself.
The term Bhagavan uses in Tamil is generally tan. Tan means oneself. Tan is a pronoun. Even Atman is a pronoun. In many, many contexts in Sanskrit, Atman is used as a pronoun. So when we say ourself, myself, we're using it, it's a pronoun. If we just say self, what does self refer to? Is there any such thing as self? That is, self is not a separate thing. Everything is itself. I am myself, you are yourself, he is himself, she is herself, it is itself. So everything is itself. So self is a pronoun rather than a noun. In Sanskrit, Atman though it's primarily used as a pronoun, by convention, it is often used to refer to what we actually are. Just like tat. Tat means that. What that means depends upon the context in which it's used. But in Vedanta, when we use the word tat without any context, it's referring to Brahman. So tat is a pronoun, but there's a convention that it refers to Brahman. Likewise, Atman is a pronoun, but by convention, when it's not clearly referring to something else, it's used to refer to Swarupa, what we actually are. Likewise, well, in English, self is essentially it's a pronoun. People sometimes talk about the self, but as soon as you talk about the self, you're reifying it. You're making it something different. Are there two things? I am myself. I am myself two different things? No, obviously they're not. They're one and the same thing. It in itself, this table in itself, are not two different things. They're one thing. So self is does not refer to anything other than the thing whose self it is. In English, that is why in English generally we use the word self along with a prefix that helps to identify what self we're referring to. So we say myself, yourself, himself, herself. We use another pronoun as a prefix to this pronoun to make the referent clearer, because pronouns by themselves have no obvious referent. It depends upon the context. When I say I'm referring to myself. When you say you're referring to yourself. So these are pronouns. So in English, it is most natural to use self along with a prefix, myself, oneself, himself, whatever. But we need to understand we're not talking about anything separate. Though the term is, for example, myself, my there, you can say, oh, my is a genitive pronoun. It's a possessive pronoun. So if you say myself, it sounds like self is a possession of me. But that's not how it works. We all understand in English when we say myself, we're not talking about a possession of ours. We're talking about ourselves. Nobody says I and myself are two different things. So we need to understand all words are imperfect. No words are adequate for this subject. But using the word self as a pronoun conveys most closely what Bhagavan is talking about. He's not talking about some thing called the self. He's talking about ourself. And likewise in Vedanta, when they talk about I am Atma Brahma, is one of the Mahavakyas. It occurs in the Mandukya Upanishad. This self is Brahman. Why do they put this self? Because it's trying to bring it home. This self, this self refers to our own self, not to some other self. So it's trying to bring it close to us. But what is being talked about is not some other thing, but myself, this very self, me. It's this I that is Brahman. But if we often Atman is translated in English as the self, or if the term Atman is used, it's often put in English as the Atman, as if it's something. But it's not a thing. It's you yourself with that Atman. There's no Atman other than yourself. In that context, I mean, everything is its own Atman, everything is itself. But when in the context in which, in Vedanta, when we use the term Atman, we're referring to ourself, not to something that we own. and not any object or thing. It's we ourselves. That's why this term "the self" creates a lot of it doesn't then people start saying, am I to investigate the ego or the self? As if there are two things to invest, as if ego and the self are two things. There's only one I. That one I we need to investigate and find out what it is. Now
Michael,
that one I seems to be ego, when we know it as it actually is, that is what we actually are.
Michael,
Yes?
I understand about, I'm not saying the self. I was curious about if I say myself, then I assume if you're saying yourself, it's the same self because there is only self. Self and awareness, Satchitananda, all of that is just one and the same. So,
yes. Ultimately, there's only one. But now, when we rise as ego, we experience multiplicity. So there seems to, well, but the point of Vedanta is to bring our attention back to ourselves. So when we say, the Tamil word tan, in many cases, the best way to translate it is oneself. But in some cases, it can, for example, in Aksharamai, Bhagavan sings, Tane Tane Tattavamidane Tane Kartavai Arunachala. Tane Tane means oneself alone is tattva, is the reality. Idane, this, Tane Kartavai, you yourself reveal this to me, Arunachala. So there, in the first Tane Tane, it's referring to ourself. The second, he uses the same word to refer, you yourself reveal this to me. Of course, the self of Arunachala is our own self, but it's the way it's put. So if we were to translate that, yourself alone is the reality, that's missing the point. Bhagavan is asking Arunachala to reveal to him that he himself is the reality.
so it's just really more of a teaching tool than anything.
It's all words, they're just pointers. Yes, they're teaching tools. They're trying to bring our, that is what is the practice Bhagavan has taught us. Very, very clearly he says in Nana, what is Atma-vichara? Sadakalamam manate Atma-vil vetiruptagutan Atma-vichara mendrupaya. The name Atma-vichara is for always keeping the mind on Atman. Atman there, what does Atman mean? It means our own self. We keep the mind on ourself. That is the whole point. What is the point of the Mahavakyas? Why do the Vedas say Tattvamasi? Before we look, once we rise as ego, we are dissatisfied. We seem to be lacking something. So we set off in search of something. We're all looking for happiness. And we may think the source of happiness is God. So we look for God, or we look for the reality, or we look for knowledge, or we look for something that's going to solve our problems. We take that thing to be other than ourselves. So the Upanishads say, Tattvamasi, you yourself are that. That is to stop us, our outward search, and to direct our attention back to ourselves. If I am that, then what am I? That's what Bhagavan points out in verse 32 of Ulinaptu. When the Vedas say, you are that, if instead of knowing oneself as what, and thereby being as one actually is, if you simply begin meditating, I am that, not this, that is only just due to weakness of, absence of strength, he says. But that strength is the strength of understanding. So the whole point of the the Mahavakyas is to turn our attention back to ourselves, to make us understand that whatever we're seeking, whether we call it God or Brahman or happiness or knowledge or whatever it may be, we ourselves are that. So to know that, we need to know ourselves.
So it does seem more accurate to say I am I, or I am that I am, rather than saying I am myself, because I am myself seems to be an object and a subject. But I am I, or I am that I am.
Yes, but is myself a subject, is an object? No. Myself, that is I, me, myself, they're all first person pronouns. They're all referring to the same thing, to ourselves, to me.
Okay.
So whether we say I am me or I am myself or I am I, it ultimately amounts to the same thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. You're welcome.
So,
In Tamil and Sanskrit, it's most natural to say, I am I. In English, we would probably be more inclined to say, I am myself, or we can even say, I am me, which is grammatically illogical because me, that is in English, very strictly speaking, for example, if someone, if you knock on the door and someone asks, who is it? We generally, if it's someone who will recognize our voice, we'll say, it's me. But grammatically, the correct way of saying it is I. Old-fashioned English teachers always used to insist that we should, because that grammatically we should say it is I, but in usage we say it is me. We don't have to worry about the language, how that is. Languages evolve over time, and not all languages are strictly logical, but we know what it means. If I say it is me, you understand what is meant. Whether I say it is I, or it is me, or it is myself, you will understand that it's all the same thing. So we need to go beyond the words and understand what the words are pointing at. But I agree with you that I am I has its own special force, because then there's no scope for any confusion. Who am I? I am I, nothing other than I.
Right. That's right. Yeah, like Ajata. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But no words are perfect. This is where the subtle intellect is necessary. We need to understand what the words are pointing at. So that's where the manana is necessary. We need to see beyond the words, to understand what the words are pointing at. And the analogy that is often given is, if you want to indicate the moon, you point your finger at it. What you expect the person to look at is not at your finger, but at what the finger is pointing at. But many people fail to understand, and they just look at the finger instead of looking at the people get confused with language because they don't think carefully enough about it. All language is pointers. So what we need to do is to understand what is being pointed at. And when we use language, we try to use language in a way that will be most effective in pointing it out. That's why as I say, I avoid using the word the self, because I think that gives rise to a wrong understanding, as if there's some thing called the self. So that's why generally I prefer to use oneself, ourself. That seems to be closer to what Bhagavan is saying in Tamil. Some people have translated the Tamil word tan as the self, but it clearly in Tamil, tan means oneself. It doesn't, I mean, it can mean yourself, himself, herself, but in the context in which Bhagavan generally is using it, it's very clearly referring to ourself alone.
And the word Atman, what is the actual meaning of Atman?
I think
In
the
that sense.
etymology comes from something like I think etymology has some connection with breath or something. But in actual usage in Sanskrit, Atman is used as a pronoun. For example, in verse 16 of Upadeshasaram, Drisya Varitam, that means rejecting the Drisya. Chittam Atmanaha Chittvadarshanam. Chittam means the mind. Atmanaha is a possessive form of Atman. In that context, it means its own Chittva, its own consciousness. So the mind seeing its own consciousness is Tattvadarshanam, it's seeing the reality. So there, Atmanaha, it's used clearly as a pronoun, it means its own. But some people who as soon as they see the word Atman, they think, oh, Atman is Brahman. So I've seen many very absurd translations of that because they don't understand. But it's very simple Sanskrit grammar. Atmanaha is a possessive form of Atman. After Chittam Atmanaha Chittva means the Atmanaha Chittva means its own consciousness. So the mind seeing its own consciousness, its own nature its own conscious nature, that is Tattva Darshanam.
Yeah, you can't make that into an object.
No, you can't. You can't.
Okay. Shall I move to the next one?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Do body minds whom have come to know self as eternal awareness exist as channels for self, as a beacon of sorts?
Body and mind know nothing. That is mind well, it depends on the sense in which we're using mind. That is, body definitely knows nothing. Mind, in the sense of all the other thoughts, doesn't know anything. Only mind, in the sense of ego, knows anything. But ego can know other things. It cannot know its own reality. But though it cannot know its own reality, it needs to try to know its own reality. Because when it knows its own reality, it ceases to be mind and remains as it actually is, as its own reality. So in the process of trying to know who am I, we cease to be ego and remain as the pure I that we actually are. But that in this verse 16, Bhagavan says, in the Tamil version, in Sanskrit he says the mind knowing its own chittva. In Tamil he says, manam tannoli uru odale, the mind knowing its own form of light. If we understand that correctly, what is Bhagavan pointing at there? That is, knowing our own form of light means knowing our nature as consciousness. Why does he say the mind knowing its own form of light? Because only when the mind knows its own form of light does it cease to be the mind and remains as that form of light that it actually is. The form of light means the Chit Swarupa, its real nature as consciousness. So as soon as we as mind or ego know ourselves as we actually are, we cease to be mind as ego and remain as we actually are. Is that clear? I know that's not quite answering the question, but that needed to clarify. The question was what about whether the mind and body have become a channel or something?
Yeah,
What was it?
I was having come to know one's self as the real self beyond body mind, but still finishing out this lifetime. Like Bhagavan, could he have been a channel for, like a beacon for others to begin the process? That was the question.
Yeah, okay. This is this idea of Jiva Mukti, attaining liberation while alive. But we need to understand about Jiva Mukti that is not the experience of of one who has attained liberation is just pure being awareness. There is no body, no mind, no world, nothing. That is the actual experience. From the perspective of us who are in ignorance, Bhagavan, after he attained, after the ego was annihilated at the time of that death experience in Madurai, he continued to live for another 54 years. And so his body and mind were used as a vehicle through which these teachings were conveyed. That is true, but only from our perspective. That is not his experience. His experience is I am I, nothing other than I. There is nothing other than I. His experience was ajata. But we see from in our perspective, he continued to live as a body and mind. And he came to Tiruvannamalai and, all the story. And then disciples came and thanks to Shiv Kashan Pillai, we got Nana. Thanks to Murugan, we got Upadesh Undia, Ulidunapdu, Anma Vidde. And thanks to Arunachal, we got Arunachal Stuti Panchakam because Arunachal prompted Bhagavan to say that. So all this is true in our perspective. From the perspective of Bhagavan, what is true is only that he puts it very clearly in verse 28 of Upadesh Undiyar. When one knows what the nature of oneself is, then Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda. That Anadi means beginningless. Ananta means endless, limitless, infinite. Akanda means unbroken, undivided. Satchidananda. That's all that remains when we know what we actually are. But from the perspective of those in ignorance, Bhagavan still seems to be a body and mind. He still seems to see the world and all these things. This is true from our perspective, but it's not the ultimate truth.
There were people that came from all over the world that described an incredible stillness and peace in the presence of Bhagavan.
Yes.
So I was thinking, well, okay, maybe because he had realized to such an extent that he was a pure channel.
Yes. From our perspective, that is certainly true.
I
But
see.
that's
Okay.
not the ultimate truth. That's what I'm saying. We need to, we, because then people think, oh, if I attain self-realization, then I will become a channel through which, that is ignorance, because once we attain self-realization, that means we as ego are swallowed, and when ego is swallowed, everything is swallowed. So it's true, but true only from our ignorant perspective.
So it would be a matter of just surrendering to prarabdhas, whatever unfolds, and that's that.
Yeah, well, yeah, but we're not just here to surrender to prarabdha. What we have to surrender to is God, who is our own reality. Surrendering, we accept whatever happens as being prarabdha, which is the will of God. But our aim is to surrender ourselves to Him. Surrendering ourselves to Him means subsiding back into the source from which we've risen, because He is our own being, the source from which we've risen.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Yeah. And in order to surrender ourselves back to our own being, that in order to subside back into our own being, we need to attend to ourselves. As Bhagavan makes clear in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph of Nana, being Atmanishta Param, being one who is firmly fixed as oneself, not giving even the slightest room to arising of any thought other than Atma-chintana, is giving oneself to God. Atma-chintana means self-attentiveness. So we need to hold on to self-attentiveness so firmly, but we don't give room to arising of any other thoughts. Thereby we subside back into our being, remain as our being, and that is giving ourselves to God, because He is our being.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We have a last question here, but if I've missed a question, then would the person either come in later or send a message, and we'll try and cover it if it's been missed already. So this question is, since we mentioned about Buddhism here, is the Buddhist anatta or anatman can be interpreted as ego?
Anatma means not oneself. Anatma does not mean that there's no self. It means not oneself. What is not oneself, that is, Buddha said in one place, sabbe, I think it is. It's in Pali. It's similar to Sanskrit, but slightly different. Sabbe dharma anatta. What that means is all dharmas are anatta. Dharma in that context, I believe, means all phenomena are not oneself. That is exactly the teaching of Vedanta. But no phenomenon is ourself. That doesn't mean that there's no self, but we are not this or that. So we need to distinguish ourselves from all that we now mistake ourselves to be. So in order to fix our mind on Atman, we need to withdraw our mind from Anatman, what is not ourself. So Anatma means anything that is not ourself. That applies to all phenomena, including this body and mind and everything. Atman, oneself, is the knower of all these phenomena. So to whom do all these phenomena appear? We turn our attention back to ourselves. So anatma simply means not oneself. That applies to everything, or to all phenomena. So we need to investigate the one to whom all these phenomena appear. The one to whom all these phenomena appear is ego, which itself is ultimately an atma, but that is ego is that mixture, that conflation of the chit and the jada. Atman is the chit, the awareness element. That is what we need to hold on to. And if we hold on to Atman, the Anatman will drop off. Now all these things seem to be ourselves because we're holding on to them. If we hold on to our own being, that fundamental awareness I am, all these other things will drop off and we alone will remain.
Actually, I found a question that was buried.
And another one has just come up from Prabhaka.
Yeah, that's where is it? Yeah, Prabhaka, that's it. That's the question that was buried. I couldn't track it down. I'll read it first, and then if he wants to come in and add, then he can. As I continue with self-inquiry, I notice that my ego repeatedly returns to the question, Why does this illusory sense of individuality seem to arise at all? People often say it is his Leela, but that explanation doesn't fully satisfy the ego. How should I relate to this question? Is there any value in trying to answer it, or should I simply trace the one to whom it arises?
Right.
Is that Prabhaka? Is that what you wanted to add?
That's precisely my question. Thanks for
Okay,
asking.
yeah, we got it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bhagavan said asking why or how is the wrong question. What we need to investigate is what or who. That is, if ego had actually risen, we could try and find out why it has risen or how it has risen. But the truth is, it has never risen. So asking how or why is like asking how or why was the son of a barren woman born. That's a question that can never be answered because there's no such thing as the son of a barren woman. Because if a woman has a son, she's not barren. If she's barren, she doesn't have any children. So it's asking how or why ego has come into existence is exactly like asking how or why the son of a barren woman was born. That is why in many sastras they say it's God's Leela, because it's a question that can't be answered, but you give an answer to it's all his Leela. So you worship him and by his grace you'll escape from this, from all this samsara. That's an answer given suitable to people at a certain stage of spiritual development. But Bhagavan's answer is first find out whether this ego has risen. If you can find this ego, bring it here to me, and then we can find out how it came into existence. But if we look for ego, there's no such thing to be found. Because we seem to be ego only so long as we're looking at other things, attending to anything other than ourselves. If we turn our attention back to ourselves, there's no such thing as ego to be found. Because what we actually are is just pure being awareness, such it. Has anyone ever seen ego? Has anyone ever found such a thing as ego? No. It's what we seem to be when we don't look at ourselves. When we look at ourselves, we will see what we actually are, which is pure being awareness. When we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the snake seems to exist because we haven't looked at it carefully enough. If we look at it carefully enough, we'll see that there's no such thing as a snake. Then the question, why did the snake come on my path, becomes redundant. First see if it's a snake, then you can ask why it came, where it came from, how it came, what species of snake it is. All these things we can ask if we actually find that it's a snake. But it's not actually a snake, it's just a rope. Exactly the same with ego. The only useful, well, even asking questions is not the point. We need to investigate what this ego is. If we investigate what it is, we will find there's no such thing as ego. What seemed to be ego is nothing but ourself as pure being awareness, such it. Is that a satisfactory answer?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I think that's it now. We won't thank Michael, we'll only thank Bhagavan because he won't entertain
Right. You
anything.
saved me the bother of saying so. Right.
Maybe you could give us the
If we thank Bhagavan, we thank everything, because Bhagavan is everything. Bhagavan is the reality underlying everything. He is our own reality. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachalaramnaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachalaramnaya.